Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Devin Malone, and I'm the Director of Public Programs and Community Engagement at the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco. Today's program features contemporary photographers presented in the current De Young Museum exhibition, Ansel Adams in Our Time, and is moderated by Dr. Emilia Mickevicius. To share more about our speakers, Stephen Tourlentes lives in Boston, where he has taught photography at the Massachusetts College of Art since 1988. In elegant, large format photographs, he investigates the uneasy relationship between institutions for incarceration and their neighboring communities. Victoria Sambunaris, in her large-scale photographs of American landscapes, captures the grandeur of nature, marked sometimes subtly, sometimes aggressively, by human intervention. Her landscapes are rarely pristine. As she explains, I am captivated by the idea of how we inhabit our landscapes and what they become as we forge ahead in our development. Abelardo Morell was born in Havana, Cuba in 1948 and immigrated to the United States in 1962. Morell received his undergraduate degree from Bowdoin College and his MFA from the Yale University School of Art. He received a Guggenheim Fellowship in 1994, an Infinity Award in Art from ICP in 2011, and a Lucy Award for Achievement in 2017. Dr. Emilia Mickevicius is the Norton Family Assistant Curator of Photography at the Center for Creative Photography and Phoenix Art Museum. In 2019, she received her PhD from Brown University, where she completed a dissertation on new topographics. Join me in welcoming today's speakers, and thanks again for watching.
All right. Thank you so much for that introduction, Devin. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this program. My name is Emilia Mickevicius, and as Devin mentioned, I'll be moderating the event tonight. I'm thrilled to be joined by these three stellar photographers who each grapple with the meeting point of nature and culture in photography, which is a major theme in the Ansel Adams in Our Time exhibition, especially where it concerns the more contemporary work in the show. One of the things that I hope we can delve into in our discussion tonight is why it matters that we have all inherited ideas about that binary from Ansel Adams himself in terms of the conventions of landscape photography that remain in place today. The very title of the exhibition, Ansel Adams in Our Time, of course, invokes the idea of evaluating Adams's legacy from the standpoint of our current moment, asking why his work remains relevant and considering how contemporary photographers have both upheld and radically departed from the model of landscape that he pursued through his work. So hopefully in our discussion tonight, we can touch on all of that and more. A bit of housekeeping. So the way that we're going to run this event is that first, each photographer will give some brief remarks on their work. Then we'll dive into a collective discussion, and finally, an audience Q&A. So to all those of you who are watching on YouTube, please do submit your questions as we go along, and then the panel will choose some of them to respond to. Our first presenting artist is Victoria Sambunaris, who is based in New York. She's represented in the exhibition by two of her sweeping landscapes that each reflect her career-long exploration of land use, development, and change in the Western United States. Vicky is actually in the midst of spending several months on the road, which is central to her practice and something that she does each year to produce new work with her large format camera. We have a wonderful presentation that she made queued up here, which we will play for you now.
Hi, I'm Vicky Sambunaris. I'm coming to you from the Colorado River, where I've been working on a new body of work for the last few months. I've been out here on the road. For the past 23 years, I've been traveling across the U.S., working mostly in the much mythologized American West. My work is concerned with the intersection of the American sublime and industries such as mining, transport, and native fossil fuel industries. I've tackled issues such as the U.S.-Mexico border in 2009, the escalating trade industries at our ports, 2016, and currently I'm working on a series addressing the crisis around the water issues in the West that we've been hearing about. I see these sites as our modern day monuments that have settled onto the American landscape. They represent the mythic American ideals of opportunity, prosperity, and success, and tell a conflicted story in geographical, environmental, political, and cultural terms. The photographs that I produce question cliched notions of landscape and our place within it, and the collective roles and responsibilities in how we shape our landscape. My practice is very much project-based. Each year I begin by researching a particular area of the country. The ideas might come from an article that I've read, maybe in the newspaper, in a magazine, or a book that I'm reading, or a conversation, but mostly from my curiosity about place and the history of place. And I travel between 3 and 6 months a year with a 5x7 film camera, video camera, and a smaller handheld camera documenting everything I see and do. I collect ephemera, maps, books, histories, stories all along the way. It's part of the process. I camp in these places so that I'm in the center of the landscape. The two pieces in the exhibition, Ansel Adams in Our Time, belong to two distinct series. The Wendover piece is from a 2000 series, Crossing the I-80 Interstate, with John McPhee's Annals of a Former World, examining the geology and industries along this major corridor in the country that runs straight through the middle of the country. The border of Utah and Nevada runs through the center of this town of Wendover, which makes it visually and culturally fascinating. The second piece is from my border work in 2009 or 10, and I was curious about the physical division between the two countries of the United States and Mexico, whether a natural border such as the Rio Grande or an imposed physical barrier exists. I'm really thrilled to be part of this exhibition and included alongside so many excellent photographers. Ansel Adams was one of my first photographers in my realm as a 14-year-old photography enthusiast. And he is one of the guiding spirits for why I do what I do today. So thank you for including me in this exhibition. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Vicki. Next, I'd like to welcome Abe Morell, who is a professor emeritus of photography at the Massachusetts College of Art. In his work, Abe has examined subjects from the street to humble, everyday objects like books and building blocks, and investigated what the modern world looks like through a camera obscura, as well as what he calls a tent camera, which operates akin to a periscope. There are several works from the latter body of work on view in Ansel Adams in Our Time. Abe, take it away.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to show you a few pictures that have to do with oops. Yeah. So before I used the tent camera, I used at advanced school a camera obscura, and in ancient ways it was known that a dark space with a small opening looking out revealed images. It's been known forever. I began to make pictures using that technique with film, making holes looking out to the world, like New York City here. I'm making very long exposures. Later, with other cameras, with film, with an assistant, the projection from the outside merged with the interior. In some cases, it's really like a circus of events. The Grand Canal mixed with Colombian jungle motifs. I mean, who needs Magritte, right? So the origins of my tent camera go back to even pre-photographic days when artists wanted to draw the world by using devices such as this, like a periscope, landing whatever the landscape was on someone's piece of paper, and they could trace it. Photography came later to actually fix that image. The tent that I first developed looks something like this, and it's basically a tripod holding a periscope that lands images nearby onto the ground, and then I would make a picture of that image together with the ground, whatever that ground was. This is an ancient one. It was a pain in the ass. And before I go further, I mean, I grew up in Cuba, and my idea of the West was, John Wayne and Westerns that I saw a lot of. So that was my sense of it. I began to explore it with my tent in very different ways. So this is the tent in situ, photographing, the known monument. And so the result is this sandwich of the view and the ground in ways that are natural. This is a Maine, dead grass, allowing, again, this very painterly feel to appear. And I really like that. This hybrid between photography and painting has always intrigued me. Well-known picture by William Henry Jackson of Old Faithful. I was able to get permission to photograph there on very volcanic rock, and so the result allowed me to merge these two events in surprising ways, I think. This is a pictures in the show. I redesigned my tent camera to be more portable. Now it's a smaller thing. The camera sits with the periscope, so it's it looks like this. It looks a little satanic, but it's portable, and it allows me to work very quickly. This is work I did in Arles last July, where Van Gogh painted. So this is my computer attached to the camera, so I could see what the image was, which turned out to be this. So it's a lot easier way to improvise pictures, and a little bit like plein air painting, French paintings from the mid-19th century. The idea of someone considering a landscape. It's sort of like me here. This is a wonderful field that I could photograph, and so I'm sort of like that guy. And this is the result. I'm going to end with a few pictures. I was in France until last week, and I made some pictures in Monet's garden. The first one with the tent, and this is the view of the water garden. And the early evening it was 8 o'clock at night. So the pebbles are the pathways of his garden, are full of these pebbles that are just inherently part of it. But the combination of the view and the pebbles, it kind of feels like a new hybrid for me, painting Monet and Morell. Some of the details from that photograph, you can sort of see how the ground itself contributes a lot to the meaning of the picture. It's not just the view, but what it's resting on. And this is the last one. The second one I made, by being very close up to the garden flowers, I got things out of focus, but then there were some flowers on the ground itself, so you get this hybrid combination of real flowers responding to the projection of the garden itself. So you get these very beautiful juxtapositions that are in some ways different from the Ansel Adams show. Now I'm almost going, these pictures are responding a little bit more to a stranger self-exploration of what a picture might be. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Abe. That newer work is really stunning.
Thank you.
Our final presenting artist is Stephen Tourlentes. As Devin mentioned, Steve is based in Boston and has also taught for many years at MassArt. His practice focuses on landscape in the age of mass incarceration in the United States. And since 1996, he has photographed penitentiaries and their surroundings at night. 2 prints from this ongoing body of work are on view in the exhibition. Welcome, Steve.
I would thank you for having me. I would like to start with not my images, but some Adams images that basically encouraged my work and opened up my eyes to and to keep learning about this thing that's been going on in this country for a long time, and how we use mass incarceration. So the photograph on the left is Adams' photograph of Mount Williamson, and it was well known to me before I ever even picked up a camera. And on the right, a friend
Steve,
of mine.
Sorry,
Yes.
Steve, quick note. We are not seeing your screen. Did you try sharing your screen?
I tried that. I had a lightning strike here, so it kind of threw the everything off. Let's see if this will. You see, is it there now?
No, still not seeing anything.
Let's see here. Share.
Oh, I think it's starting. Now we're seeing your PowerPoint. Excellent.
There we go.
Perfect. Thank you.
Sorry about that. So my description without images, I hope was not as good. The images here on the left, again, Mount Williamson, and then Adams behind him turned around and was working on this project also in the Manzanar Japanese American internment camp during World War II. So it really kind of, I had made a photograph of a prison that was built in my hometown in Illinois, but I had sort of squirreled that photograph away, and I didn't really think that much about it. And then once I realized sort of how Adams had these 2 different angles and what kind of happens beyond the boundary of the frame, it really stuck with me, and I began seeing and looking at the landscape and how we use the landscape, and how nature and the sublime aspect of it is so, beauty is really, really important. This image is taken from the internet. It's not mine. It's a photograph in Buena Vista, Colorado, and this is a viewpoint, but this is a photograph from the same viewpoint that I made as night falls, and these prisons begin to reveal themselves through the light that they transmit beyond the boundaries of their of the walls. And you can see that this was a place where people come to make snapshots, have picnics, but they don't normally see what's right below them in terms of the prison, people who are exiled and held in the landscape. So this image is one of the images that's in the Adams show, and it's from Florence, Colorado, and it's the Federal Supermax Penitentiary. And again, I'm really interested in this idea that light is a signal, that these places present themselves, and they once the light that falls on all of us in terms of the sun sets, that they are never allowed to go dark, and that the only thing that escapes from these sites is the light itself. And that light is trying to illuminate the landscape, and in many cases, this project has allowed me to see, the American landscape has been photographed, but it's pretty amazing, and there's still lots of pictures to be made out there. This one was made in Rawlins, Wyoming, and it is in the show as well. And the interesting thing to me about this picture is that Adams was a master technician and knew how to manipulate film and printing to sort of bring that majesty to it. So this photograph is a photograph that really should not be here, because it was taken during a blizzard, and it was snowing so hard, and there was just no hope that this picture was actually going to come out. But the light from the prison only allowed it to reveal itself. You couldn't see it during the day because it was recessed into these hillsides. And it also broadcast this light up into the blizzard snow clouds that kind of created this amazing illumination. And that's what happens sometimes with time, with time and photography. And then also for me, I think the prisons reference time, both past and future, depending on which side of the boundary you're residing. So I'll just show you just some examples of different sites and different places. I've got some California ones in here for those of you that way. This is Vacaville, California. This is in Pennsylvania. And the thing that I'm interested in is not so much just the prisons, but also the communities that beyond the prisons that are in peril, that tend to be the people who end up in this system. And my curiosity that I feel that there's a feedback that's happening, that should be happening, to look at investing into communities differently than necessarily using it through these forms of punishment and exile. So this is Dublin, California, with a women's prison in the background there, and it's these new condominium communities have developed recently. And Fishkill, New York, people who live right on the other side of the boundaries of the prisons have a different relationship to time. This is in downtown Chicago, so that it's built, this prison is built to blend in with the architecture, the famous architecture of the city there. This is in upstate New York. So you have, the thing that fascinates me is, and part of my interest is I'm not afraid of beauty. I really feel like somehow engaging people in this conversation is my voice. And sometimes beauty is really important to get people engaged to look at these images, because they don't scream out necessarily that they are prisons, and that is a way of kind of seducing the viewer into kind of spending more time and thinking about it, because these things tend to sit on the periphery of people's consciousness. So it's there in a way as to kind of confront them as to where these places are and why we use them. So thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Steve. And thank you to all of you for all of your very thoughtful presentations. I'd like to invite the artists to turn their cameras and mics back on. All right. And Abe, we're not seeing you yet, but Vicky, I see you. And Steve, if you could please stop sharing your screen.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. That. Let's see if I can get it to respond.
Perfect.
There we go.
All right. Okay. Yeah, so taken together, all of your work really demonstrates the extent to which landscape photography practice in the US has departed from the model that we inherit from Adams, which was intended to be timeless and heroic and sentimental about the landscape, and rather than critical. And it's a model beholden to romantic landscape painting, one that is not necessarily tied to specific subject matter, but more so sets up viewer responses of awe and uplift and transcendence. In Adams's photographs, people do not appear in the landscape very often, if at all, and the pictures are conventionally dramatic. They're hierarchical in terms of their compositions, and they're expressive, pointing back to Adams as their maker. There's a kind of temperamental gulf between Adams's work and much of more recent landscape photography, like all of yours. So with that in mind, I'd like to begin by asking, why still look at Ansel Adams? How does he remain relevant, and what has his work meant to you in your career?
Are you asking anyone?
Yes.
Well, I'll start by saying that when I started photography in '69, I knew nothing about technical stuff, and so I bought all his books. And I loved his pictures from the beginning, but part of what I loved about them was his ability to make photography look right. I mean, make light right, like Monet, and he just gave us so many instructions and books and things like that to allow us to do that. So he was a sharer in that sense. He wanted other people to find, his method, and I was a big fan.
Yeah, his work was, as a 14-year-old photography enthusiast, he was the person that I was looking at. The work was heroic. I was raised on the East Coast, had never gone west. I'd never seen these types of landscapes. They were monumental. He's the one person when I'm on the road, he's the one photographer that people actually know who he is and know about landscape photography when they're asking me, what do you do? And why are you using that camera? And so, yeah, he remains relevant today. So,
yeah. Steve, do you have thoughts on that too?
Yeah, I would echo both of you. I mean, I think that when I first became kind of obsessed with photography when I was a freshman in college, that in the library collection where I was at school, there was about 3 books on photography, and 2 of them were Adams. So that that was what the source code that was available to me as well. But and then the other one I think was Atget. So very traditional components that kind of like the foundation was built off of. But I think that the other thing with Adams that's really important is there's an emotional element to the craft of what went into his work, and I'm not somebody who wants to make craft really important, but I think at least for me, it's really important that the objects, the photographs that I make, have the material gives it everything it be. It has to be really beautiful to kind of evoke, because there's not a lot there. I mean, it's just shape, light, and shadow in my pictures, and so Adams helped me kind of think about that.
That's great. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot about his influence in terms of really impacting the kind of mental storehouse of images of the landscape that we all carry around in our heads, which of course influences how we see the landscape too. And we look for hierarchy and beauty, and I would, characterize his work as setting up a more kind of passive or pleasurable viewership, whereas a lot of the more recent work in Ansel Adams in our time, like all of yours, positions the viewer to adopt a more critical eye, toward the social or political or technological forces that operate in the landscape, whether those forces are visible or not. And so I'd love to ask all of you too, how do you approach directing the viewer's attention in your pictures as it serves the meaning you hope to convey? Maybe Abe, we can start with you. What went into your decision to pursue this body of work where you literally, train the viewer to look at the ground and train our attention that way?
Well, I think as any artist would probably say, I don't want to be boring, and from the beginning on, I wanted to make pictures that in some ways had never been done before. It's big of me, but I've always really thought of finding ways to re-channel what a view could be into something that's a little bit mine. Maybe it's the Cuban refugee in me to possess, this country, adopted country. But like, the geyser exploding, in my picture, there are 4 billion pictures of that thing. I think there's one of mine that looks like that. And so the idea of being maybe not original, but finding a way into the landscape that is already so, in some ways, boring and cliche, and make it interesting again. For me, that's a big deal.
It's true that, thinking about the kind of assignment of, make a picture of Old Faithful that we've never seen before. That's very hard to do. It's true. And, Vicky, you were talking about kind of related to this, moving through the landscape and encountering people, and Ansel Adams being the only person that, people could kind of grab onto to make sense of what you were doing. How do you see your work kind of directing the viewer's attention in the image in a way that either conforms to what he did or departs from it?
Well, I think I'm not so much thinking about, the viewer's experience, but fulfilling my own curiosity about the landscape and place. And growing up on the East Coast in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, I had never gone west until I was in my late 20s after graduate school. I had only gone up and down the East Coast. I was pretty sheltered. So the first trip that I took west, I couldn't take one photograph on that trip. I had the camera. I'd take it out of the car, put it back in. I was completely overwhelmed. The country is enormous, and it's I had so much curiosity about it. The two pieces that are in the show, one of them is of the border fence. So I traveled the U.S.-Mexico border in 2009 because I was curious about that division between the two countries and the border. Before it was actually, it's always been a political issue, but it wasn't talked about the way it is now. And so I needed to see it. So I needed to go there and travel that border and look at that landscape. And so that's the approach I take. And of course, I want to make also monumental and majestic images and somehow bring together beauty and in trying to make sense of this landscape. It's so complex, the landscape. And it's a reflection of who we are.
Absolutely. Yeah. Steve, I don't know if you had an answer to that question about directing the viewer's attention, but with what Vicky was just saying about kind of reckoning with these expanses of space that were unfamiliar to her, it made me think about something that I see in common in both of your work, which is the use of vacancies and how that kind of relates to the sublime. Like thinking back to photography's inheritance of romantic landscape ideals, with the sublime in particular, the romantics associated it with a kind of response of pleasurable fear. The idea was that you were looking at threatening mountain peaks during a thunderstorm, for example, but from the safe distance of representation, and you would feel this mixture of awe and bewilderment. And so I think, both your and Vicky's work kind of point to a contemporary take on sublimity. And you both mentioned the sublime in your presentations. And so, does that resonate for you? And what happens to the sublime when you let the built environment into the picture rather than just nature alone?
Sure. Yeah. No, I it does totally connect in the idea that with the prison photographs, those really started from a conversation with my father, who was involved in public mental health, and he ran a large mental health center, and that was defunded, and then in my hometown, and then the factories in my hometown all moved out as well, and so the town was in this very quandary economically, and so they courted having a prison built in the town to preserve jobs. So when I saw the lights on the edge of town that were never there before, and that they were beautiful, and I didn't know what they were, and my father explained to me what it was, and that some of his former patients were now incarcerated in that prison, that was what really fueled my thought process and the learning process, learning how to take these pictures, learning how to involve other people, because I think there's a lot of things written about mass incarceration, and I felt like if there's some visual chronicling, visual help that can push that conversation further, then that's a task I'm willing to take on.
Absolutely. Yeah. I wonder if it resonates for you too, the idea of having a kind of mixed attraction and repulsion or aversion to your subject matter, because that light in the distance is so alluring, but when you know what it is, it becomes insidious.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. I think growing up in the Midwest, we had long car rides. I'm a rubbernecker. I was, before the people had phones all the time, I was always looking out the window and you'd see light in the distance, and that meant a place to go to, until I had this experience with the prisons. And there were quite a number in Illinois, towns that were in the same situation, that they suddenly started building prisons and warehousing cargo. The human cargo was being filled up in these downstate farm towns. And then once I saw a few of them, then somehow I just started seeing them all over the country wherever I traveled. And so my American road trip is to some pretty far off places where exile is sort of created. And in some places, the landscape is so beautiful, even though what is there is horrible, what they're using it for.
It's true. That's such a striking image, what you bring up about going on road trips as a child and seeing that beckoning light, and I feel like your work really conjures that formal knowledge in the viewer. It's that familiarity with that experience is kind of triggered, but then we learn more about what the work is about, and it's like, oh wow, really kind of shifts our experience of that. All of you bring photography into relation with other histories and bodies of knowledge. For example, Abe, your work really speaks to fundamentals of optics and camera craft, and harkens back to devices that anticipated photography, like the camera obscura. And Vicky and Steve, of course, you're looking at specific types of industry that proliferate across the landscape. Can each of you speak a bit about the importance of research in your practices and what that looks like for you, or just non-photographic influence in your work? Abe, would you like to start?
Sure. I do a lot of research. I'm sort of a dummy in many ways. I was not a shining star in college, but I did a lot of research into optics and the physics of it and old processes, and just so I can get the right thing going. So I invented sort of this thing that I have now. But I was going to say at the service of, if I have to say what my pictures might be about, and it's maybe related to my having grown up somewhat poor, working class in Cuba, and then exiles even more. But that sense of the common next to the majestic. With my pictures with this tent, what you get is this incredible mountain or whatever, but it's resting on the pebbles and the shards of what our ground is, And I really like that, without trying to be corny and be, leaves of grass guy, but it's this combination of the grand and the common. Like in France, I was making these pictures that look like Monet's, but the bottom line was these pebbles that could have been around when he was around, So reaching that gap between the small in particular and the grand is part of, I think, what's interesting, because it's a philosophy that says everything counts.
Absolutely. Vicky or Steve, do you have any response to, how research or non-photographic influences figure in your work?
Well, I like Abe, like my parents were Greek immigrants that came to this country in search of this idea of the American dream. having a better life than their children having a better life than their own. And so I guess when I was early on, like when I was in graduate school, I was investigating what that meant. You know, I was looking at a lot of corporate campuses and suburban developments and questioning those ideas about the American dream. And it's evolved today. There's an enormous amount of research. I've shifted. I mean, I'm still interested in these ideas. I mean, that's the basis of the work. But I am curious about particular areas. Like I might read an article about, like, for example, right now I'm working on the Colorado River and the issues circulating around the water issues in the West. And so that makes being on the road and looking at this landscape so interesting to me, to learn all of the issues. And it might be an article that I read or a book that I read that sends me out on the road to research through the lens of the camera to fulfill my own curiosity.
It sounds like it really enriches how you see and, you know, provides context to what you're seeing. Yeah.
Yes.
Steve, do you have more input on that too, kind of in relation to your work?
Yeah, well, I think that I'll be the first to admit that I'm not an expert on mass incarceration. I feel like I'm still a student learning, but it's been a long process and lots of reading, and then going to these various sites also, just because sometimes I'm not welcomed from the vantage points of where I'm photographing from. So but I learned things, and you know, there's an interesting aspect of using this old-fashioned 8x10 camera that when I do run into, let's say, the local law enforcement that doesn't want me necessarily where I'm at, sometimes that big camera diffuses the situation because they look at it and they're like, what the hell is this guy doing? You know, in the middle of the night out here with this thing. And so it's been kind of learning. And, you know, Abe and I have known each other forever. And, you know, it's just learning and looking at other things, like things that are really beautiful. I mean, I think, and also understanding, like, you know, Abe used to talk to me about Piranesi all the time and Piranesi's prisons, you know, and I went and looked at that. So people, you know, like when you make work, whatever it is, and you show it to people, take advantage of that, I guess, the delight of somebody else spending the time and saying what they think, and maybe they bring something else to it that I get to use. I get, you know, it feeds me.
Absolutely. Yeah, our conversation is just going so quickly already, and I have so many more questions, but maybe what I'll do is ask one more, and then we can move into some audience Q&A too. I guess the last question I want to ask you in this component kind of relates to the previous one and what all of you just brought up. An important part of Ansel Adams's practice and other modernist photographers like Edward Weston was pre-visualization, this idea that one approached the landscape in a way where you could mentally translate what you saw before you into a picture, you know, in their case, a black and white image with exquisite tonal range. And it suggests this idea of looking at the world as a field of potential latent pictures waiting to be realized. Does that notion of pre-visualization resonate with you? Because, you know, you all work in series and have an idea of what you're going out to encounter, but all of you also just kind of, in your answers to the prior question, brought up the idea of serendipity or kind of ongoing discovery. And so, you know, pre-visualization, is it still relevant? Is your work still kind of a product of you know, intuition and serendipity?
I think the term is bullshit. I think that Adams and Minor White and people who I adore, by the way, but they had this idea that you could pre-visualize Steve, Vicky, and I are photographers. We're not thinkers. We're not data collectors. We don't know when a picture comes out. We're always, first of all, grateful,
Yes.
surprised. When something works, it's always surprising. Even though you may have something in mind, it tends to just kind of, it's a reward, for imagining that maybe something in there could work. Maybe that's privatization, but oftentimes the artist in us is half blind. You knock on something, and in some cases it opens, and it's why we love being what we are.
Abe said that so well, like he's right on about it. It is like a gift when you get a photograph. You just have no idea.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's true. I mean, even if you're working in the studio with elements you are arranging, I'd imagine, Abe, you've worked in that manner. In some of your other series, I'd imagine there's still that kind of intuitive, like pre-verbal flash of recognition where you see the elements before you cohere into this thing and you press the shutter. It's really, hard to put that into words. And I think what makes photography such a special and difficult medium, because in so many ways it is about attention and observation. So now I guess let me turn to a couple of the audience questions that have come in on YouTube. Let's see here. I am curious about the artists using color versus black and white. Adams used only black and white. Do you as artists find it limiting? So I wonder if we can kind of take this question and think about photographic seeing, like in color versus black and white. What does that feel like to you? Or, why do you choose the mode that you do?
Because it works the best for what you're doing. No, I mean, I don't see distinctions between black and white and color. I mean, it's all an invented form in which to express yourself. And, I did black and white for a long time. And then I made a good color picture once, and I went, where have I been? So I think we're not as rigid as we might seem. When Vicky uses black and white, it's precisely because she gets the thing that she wants. It's not because, I wish I could use color. No, it's a very smart, sophisticated piano that it's been tuned, and you know what you want, and she does it well.
Well, I use color, but the last few years I've been throwing in some black and white film in my, bringing black and white sheet film with me. And I've been making some black and white photographs that rarely get seen, but in some ways it's satisfying. But so I do a little bit of both.
How does your dealer feel about that?
She's not too interested in the black and white.
Yeah, no, I'm referring to those black and white pictures I've seen by you.
Yeah. Mark Elliott is printing them. Yeah,
which I like, but
thank you. Yeah, thank you.
But I think it's a very this fine-tuned choice, and black and white is it is more romantic. It forgives a lot. So heroes are all black and white.
Yeah, and it's like I feel like I can it's not as I feel sometimes limited with the color. I mean, with the light, and black and white is definitely much more forgiving.
Steve,
I guess I would approach it from, at least with what I am photographing, is that I love the reduction of what the material, like how can I use the kind of quality of the monochromatic image, because when I have tried some of these in color, and the problem with them to me is they become too Spielbergish. They become too much like a UFO or something like that. And I want them to feel like a place where you, the viewer, is standing and witnessing with me or wherever the camera's at, and thinking about your relationship to what you're looking at, and that the black and white, and also, I see in color, and so I'm always excited in a way to kind of see what is really going to be rendered. So it's reductivist to me, and
It's but it's interesting to me that in order to tell the truth better, you have to sort of lie about, it's not what the world looks like.
That's right.
You have to take a strategy that goes around the truth to tell it better, and it's more effective in black and white. Absolutely.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I'm getting told that we have time for one more question from the audience.
Wow,
that really flew by.
Okay, I'm a Virgo. Is that one of the questions?
That's so funny. Let me see. Somebody asks, if Ansel Adams were alive today, what question would you ask him? That's a tough one.
I would ask him what his new digital camera looks like. He would have he would have absolutely used it. I mean, not that, it's just that he was always involved in technology that allows certain things. He made huge, super large prints. I think he made some Polaroids too, I think. Yeah, so I think he would be just as curious as anybody.
That's great, because another question somebody asked was, would Ansel Adams' work done today with digital photography be different? So that's interesting that you kind of touched on that in your answer. Vicki and Steve, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I would just say that I'd be curious about Ansel Adams' piano playing, because I understood, I know
he was good.
I think he's well-rounded. Yes, right. It's like, it's not just photography, right? There's these other things. And I think that's the interesting thing when you talk to artists, that there's something that they may be really known for, but there's something else that feeds their compulsion that can be quite beautiful and maybe not as well known. And so I'm sure Abe and Vicki have, their secrets.
Yeah, I'm writing an opera.
I'd like to take a master class with Ansel Adams. I'd like to go out with him, and I need it. I so need it. I didn't read the book.
Would be fun.
I have to say, what I saw, maybe his last show at MoMA, and what's interesting is that the late work, the way he was printing his late work, pictures were really contrasty and dark, sort of against his form from earlier days. But even Ansel Adams, the king of, I'm just an observer here, his soul was coming in, through those pictures. So not even Ansel Adams could escape that need for us to tell things through not just our eyes.
I think that's a wonderful note to end on. Just thinking about the power of photography and photographic seeing. Thank you all so much for joining me for this conversation, which could have lasted, for hours and hours beyond this. And thank you to our audience for joining us on YouTube, and wishing all of you well. Good night.
Thank you. Thank you, Emmy. And hi, Abe and Steve.
Bye, Vicki. Bye, Steve.
Let's get a drink, and let's have a drink in New York.
Yeah, maybe Red Sea.